Hi, this is David with the Discount Dragon, and we are here talking about art today. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about part of my creative process, which serves both to motivate me and to lend a little extra depth to the work and make it more fun both for me and for the consumers. Now, people do art in a lot of different ways, and they have a lot of different processes. So this is just something that I do that helps me to kind of create a mythology and a backstory behind my art. And I make mainly fantasy art, like you'll see down here. I've got mythical creature relics like troll skulls. I've got dragon claws, goblin skulls, alien skulls, unicorn horns, magic wands. This is a little baby Cthulhu skull, still in the works. And this is a wand carving artifact. Wand carving tool. Now, what all of these have in common is that they've all got a story. And the story doesn't, it's not mandatory, it's not anything that you have to have, but if you've got more depth to your idea of where these things originated, and if you give them a history in your mind, it helps when you're creating them. For instance, the dragon claws. The dragon claws come in different colors, and I've got a reason that they're different colors. It's the dietary habits of the dragons, and the dietary habits have specific purposes. And so I've got something behind the story, and then I've got something behind that. And the deeper your well of this storyline is, the more you can draw upon when you're sitting there saying, well, what do I do now? For instance, we've got these wands. This one is not one of my best wands, and therefore the story behind it is that it was made by some off-brand wand maker, and that it was abused, and it's secondhand, etc. But more typically, the wands that I sell are presumably made by a wand maker company called Thorson and Spinneret. And this is a better example of their work. This is not a wand. This is something that logically should exist if wands exist. If you were living in a world with magic and mystical items, one of the things you would need is magical tools to create the magical items. And that's what this is. It's a very fine-tipped carving tool. It's made out of ebony. It's got a moonstone in the handle, and if you look here, it's got a little description in a very weathered sort of look. It's in velvet to give it an antique and vintage sort of look, and to get across the idea that it was made by a high-end establishment. And of course, we got the label here, Thorson and Spinneret, fine tools of wizardry, established 1328. Of course, it's a fictional establishment in a fictional kind of splinter universe, but it helps me to come up with ideas. It's like if they are wands, then there must be wand-making tools. The same sort of logic works when you get to mythical creatures. Because you look at this, and it's a troll, but why is the troll made the way it is? In other words, why is the design this particular design? Why are the teeth made in this particular fashion? And it could just be arbitrary and aesthetic and nothing more, and that's perfectly fine if that's your style. But for me, I look at the teeth and I come up with ideas as to what the behavior of the creature is, what the social structure is. I come up with what their diet is and what kind of teeth they're going to need. And this all lends itself to giving me an idea for how to make the product. It gives me kind of something to follow and guidelines to follow. With the sewer goblins, the skull is made in such a way that it reflects the backstory if you know what the backstory is. The seams on the back of the skull show lots of distress, lots of damage, and that became part of what sort of creatures these are. And also the teeth, very jagged, very ragged, very uneven. All of this factors into the story of the sewer goblins. It factors into their pilgrimage from living in the forests and living in rabbit warrens to moving into the cities and adapting to the environments there and the changes in their culture, etc., etc., etc. So it all helps with the creative process if you're working in a fantasy world and if this is something that suits your personality. And of course, I give out pieces of this to the people buying the products, and it helps them to kind of give a sense of, not realism, because they all know that these things are fictional, but it gives them a sense that I'm having fun with it, they're having fun with it, they're part of the joke. They're part of the storyline. And it's the same thing when you're reading a book. You like to imagine that you're there. Now, a lot of this stuff comes from the Royal Imperial Museum, which is a fictional museum that I created specifically to give an origin for a lot of these artifacts. And the Royal Imperial Museum story is partly told in the listings for my artifacts and pieces of art. And the Royal Imperial Museum has decided to upgrade its appearance and become more modernized. And they're throwing away everything mystical and magical and mythological. The problem is they're wrong. All of these things do exist, and the Royal Imperial Museum is overrun by mythical creatures. There's sewer goblins like eating the artifacts and attacking the crew, and it's obviously just this attempt to become modernized past the point of sanity, kind of like the political correctness craze that is running through society now. It's like you're pushing things past the point of reasonableness in an attempt to seem more reasonable than you are. So the curator of the Royal Imperial Museum is fighting the reality of these mystical creatures, and it comes out in the listings, it comes out in the other interactions between him and the other fictional things we've created. For instance, one of the things he does, and that I do rather freely, is break the fourth wall of the illusion. For instance, in one of the product listings, the person selling the product says, and we asked the curator if he found it odd that his institution was in fact fictional, and he told us to bugger off. So the person theoretically writing the listing for the product is acknowledging that the museum doesn't exist, and the curator, who presumably doesn't exist either, is insulted by being told that he and his museum do not in fact exist. So it's a little bit jokey and kind of in the spirit of things like Deadpool. But yeah, that's part of my creative process. It's creating a fictional fantasy world or elements of fictional fantasy worlds and creating a backstory and history and something beyond that, a lot of which will never come to light in the course of my artwork because it's just too in-depth for anybody to really need to know about. But it's there for me. When I'm asking myself, what should I create or how should I create it, I can look at this backstory and think about these histories and mythologies and see what grows out of it. And for me, it's very useful, and it's a whole lot of fun. It adds an element for me, it adds an element for the audience, and it just adds this level of richness that I really enjoy. That's just my thoughts on my particular creative process, and maybe some of you out there might latch onto this and enjoy doing something like this yourself. I have talked to a few artists who do similar things, but I just thought I would share. So go out there and create something.